Welcome inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Dan Hope joined by Andy Anders. It's quarterback day here for interviews at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. We got to talk to Billy Fessler, Julian Sayin, Lincoln Keenholz, Tavian St. Clair, but the most interesting revelation of the day was not about the quarterbacks. It was about the offensive line, because Ryan Day also held an interview session today, and he revealed that Austin Siereveld has been practicing at left tackle. Now, we didn't see that during the open practices last week. He was at right tackle for all of the open practices. But it sounds like in the last couple of days, Austin Siereveld has made a move over to left tackle, and they're potentially looking at him being that guy protecting the blind side for the offensive line, which is a very interesting thing to me, because it speaks to two things to me. One, it speaks to how highly Ohio State thinks of Austin Siereveld. We have heard Ryan Day, Ohio State's coaching staff, talk up Austin Siereveld time and time again this offseason, two-time Iron Buckeye. It's clear that he's going to play a major role on this offensive line at one spot or another. But the expectation until today, all offseason, had really been that Rice transfer Ethan Onianwa was going to be the starting left tackle. Now, based on what Ryan Day said today, he's been taking some reps at right tackle and even at guard. So it says to me they really like Austin Siereveld, but it also says to me that maybe they're not sold on Ethan Onianwa as their left tackle.
Yeah, gotta love where Austin Siereveld has come since the experience he got last year, making a few starts and spots when Donovan Jackson was hurt early in the year, when throughout the season working in with Tegra Shabola, and then in the college football playoff, the rotation early on with Tegra, with Luke Montgomery, and then in the last two games of the playoffs, just he and Tegra rolling at right guard. Being named an Iron Buckeye this spring, the transformations that have happened with his body, even in the spring we heard Ryan Day say that Austin Siereveld will be a starter this fall for Ohio State, and it was just a matter of more where is he going to start, whether that was at right tackle where we thought the competition was coming off of spring practice and Ethan Onianwa feeling like that clear left tackle starter, but now it seems that Sierreveld's making this move. And so now it's that question of, is this more a testament to where Austin's at and just how good, like, has he taken this giant leap from being, a solid contributor at guard last year to now a phenomenal tackle? Or is there reason for concern about the situation at offensive tackle for Ohio State with Ethan Onianwa, with even Phillip Daniels and Ian Moore and the other guys that are contending for those spots there at the tackle position, moving Ethan over? And I think, coming in with Ethan, all the experience he had from Rice, the opinions of experts who said that he probably would have been a pretty highly touted tackle in the NFL draft, a guy that probably would have been selected in the NFL draft, coming back for another year and trying to develop himself at a major program like Ohio State. It felt like a sure thing, but there are very rarely sure things when you're transferring from a program like Rice to a program like Ohio State. It's such a huge leap in competition, and clearly these defensive ends, you saw over the weekend, I was attending a wedding for the Saturday practice with a lot of O-line, D-line, one-on-ones. Ethan kind of looking good from what it sounded like in some of the one-on-one pass rush periods, but not as good in the team drills, getting kind of run over by Caden Curry and some of the other defensive ends on the team. And this would seem to indicate that maybe that trend has continued, and now they're looking at other options. Still early in spring practice, the pads haven't been on for a lot of days, but just the fact that Ohio State is evaluating its options and what it looks like with Austin Siereveld at left tackle, I think does raise some concerns. That said, Day also said today that he feels very confident in the offensive line depth, feels they can go 8, 9, 10 deep, and that it's more about solidifying who that starting five is. But the top end of it needs to be at a certain level when you're talking about offensive tackle play and protecting a new quarterback, especially with Texas's fearsome edge rushers coming in here in week one. So cause for concern, more cause to be excited about Austin Siereveld, but definitely some cause for concern at offensive tackle.
Yeah, there's been some chatter going back to the spring about Ethan Onianwa maybe having some struggles in pass protection during practice, and I do think we saw some of that on Saturday. In general, the defensive ends dominated the day on Saturday, the last practice that we got to see. Kenyatta Jackson, Bo Atkinson, Caden Curry, C.J. Hicks, they were all getting in the backfield a lot. And I kind of looked at that more in terms of the depth, in terms of I thought, Phillip Daniels and Ian Moore had their share of struggles in that practice. But I would say, from what we saw in those first 3 days, I did think Austin Siereveld was the more consistent of the two tackles. And I thought Ethan did have some lapses in pass protection. So I do think that probably has a lot to do with why they're looking at this move. And, again, we've heard lots of good things about Austin Siereveld, but the reality is he's never played tackle in a collegiate game. Yeah. So if he's your left tackle on day one, I'm not saying he can't do it, but I don't know if he can do it because I haven't seen it in an actual. We really haven't even seen it that much in practice. We saw it a little bit last year, but we didn't see it in these open practices in terms of him playing left tackle. We saw it a little bit in the spring, but there's some projection there with a guy who played guard last year in a rotational capacity, now potentially being your starting left tackle. And then, like you said, on the other side of that, you have Ethan Onianwa. There's that projection of making the jump from Rice to Ohio State. So, I'm not necessarily hitting the panic button yet at offensive tackle, but I definitely, my concern is raised there. Where, if we were talking about positions of concern on this team, we've talked a lot about defensive tackle depth, but I think offensive tackle is climbing up my ranks right now because, to hear that they're not sold necessarily on Ethan Onianwa, that left tackle, and hearing that he's even taking some reps at guard, we had talked about it last week. We felt like that competition for starting spots was probably between Luke Montgomery, Eddrick Houston, and Austin Siereveld, Philip Daniels. Well, Ethan Onianwa might be in that competition now. Like, he might not be a guy who's a guaranteed starter all of a sudden if they're moving him around the line.
Yeah, I think for me, the guard talk, and maybe I'm reading into this too much, but the guard talk is more of like in the spring, it was all about making sure guys had a second position, and Ethan Onianwa kind of getting his feet under him, learning the new scheme, learning the system. Didn't get a chance to cross-train as much, so I think they're maybe just building depth with that move, because I feel confident that they have a good enough selection of guards between Siereveld if he were to move back inside, but now it sounds like he's their best tackle maybe. Between Luke Montgomery, Eddrick Houston, Carson Hinsman could slide over and play guard if need be.
Well, it could be more too of maybe they want Ethan to be that swing guy. We've talked about Austin and Carson being those swing guys. But if Austin's the left tackle, Carson Hinsman's the center, you could make a strong argument those are the two most important positions on the offensive line. Maybe you don't want those guys being the guy that has to move back into guard. And I think we have thought maybe the depth is a little bit stronger at tackle and center than it is at guard. So, if right now, we don't know this for sure, but if right now Austin Siereveld was the starting left tackle and Ethan Onianwa was the starting right tackle, maybe you want Ethan to be that guy that you could move when maybe we had assumed that was Austin. Now, I do think, among the, like Ryan Day said, they feel like they have 9 or 10 guys who can play. I was pretty impressed with Gabe Van Sickle. I honestly thought out of a backup offensive lineman, he was the guy who looked the most ready to play to me in those open practices. So I think Gabe Van Sickle could still be that first guard off the bench without necessarily having to move somebody. But, we saw what happened last year with, Donovan Jackson moving around, Carson Hinsman moving around. You definitely want to have contingency plans on that offensive line. You want to be able to, if someone goes down, to not just have one option to replace that guy, but to be able to say, who are our best 5 now? And so the more versatility guys have, the better. And, I think about it, if Ethan's playing guard, Austin's played both guard and now tackle. Luke's taken reps at center. Carson's played both center and guard. Tegra's played both guard and tackle. So that gives you then all 5 of your projected starters can play multiple positions, and that's a really good thing for versatility and depth.
Right, and Ryan Day talked about too the importance of that 6th guy, that utility guy, having swing capabilities. So that's something they're going to cultivate throughout the offensive line room. I do feel like we have to touch on quarterbacks a little bit today because it was quarterbacks day, and obviously that's the position competition that everyone is following throughout preseason camp here. Pardon my little bit of slurring of words there. I think it wasn't the most revelatory day in terms of talking to the quarterbacks, which is perhaps why we're focused more on the offensive line conversation and what Ryan Day said.
And I don't think we thought that Ryan Day or Billy Fessler was going to come out and name a starter today.
Absolutely not. There's still a lot to play out in terms of they're going to have scrimmages. They're going to have a lot more to evaluate on film. Ryan Day kind of like his indication was that it's been a mix. Like you could cut up 10 good reps and 10 bad reps for each of the quarterbacks in the room right now. Julian Sayin and Lincoln Keenholz stayed pretty mum about it. Lincoln wasn't even willing to name who was the better golfer between the two of them, he and Julian, when he mentioned that they played golf together this summer, which I thought was pretty funny. Like they are giving nothing away about where
I have heard Ryan Day talk up Lincoln's handicap. He hasn't talked up Julian. So my guess, just based on that context, would be Lincoln's probably the better golfer and he's being humble. But I don't know. That could be wrong.
That would be my guess too. But hey, maybe Julian out of nowhere has a mean swing. But it was great to hear them talk about like friendship and being like close despite the competition. Lincoln Keenholz was named an Iron Buckeye, talked about the honor that was. And I think that speaks to like being a leader by example and leading through the weight room is maybe a strength that Lincoln has, that diverse athletic skill set. But Julian Sayin talked about how his leadership has been growing this offseason, has really, I think, taken a step up in his command of the huddle, it sounds like. And a similar note from Billy Fessler about Lincoln, talking about how he has taken that step up and trying to develop his voice more. I think that's one of the key things for both these guys. Consistency is always the word we hear from Ryan Day, from Billy Fessler, about what will actually determine the quarterback competition, and that rang true again today. Billy Fessler, when asked about like what's the important factor, it's making the routine plays routinely, that consistency, and command of the huddle, being the leader in the room. Even something that Ryan Day, when reflecting on his own quarterback battle back in his college days at New Hampshire, said was super important for winning and getting that starting job ultimately, was developing that command and being that leader in the room, which is something undervalued by fans and maybe even by us. When you watch a guy throw a football, it's, you see that, but something that coaches are going to put a lot of emphasis on, something that's really important to the locker room, is having that leader and that command guy at quarterback. So who can step up and take charge of that in that way is another factor to consider in this competition.
One more thing to touch on today, some very positive news on the Eddrick Houston front. Ryan Day said that they expect Eddrick to be back on the field within the next 48 hours, perhaps as soon as tomorrow. So great news there for Ohio State's defensive line. I mean, we talked about it on day one when he got hurt. It looked like it could be more serious. Losing him, he's one of their most indispensable players. So that would have been a huge loss. Knowing that he's going to be back on the field, we've seen some good things from Caden McDonald during the open practices. It makes you feel a lot better about where they are in terms of those starters at defensive tackle. Now, Ryan Day continued to say today that, that they still need to see more out of those backup defensive tackles, that they're pushing those guys. And, they really have wanted those guys to take advantage of the extra reps they're getting because Eddrick's sideline and act like they're starters, perform like they're starters. And I don't know that they've necessarily quite seen that yet, but I do think we saw some promising things from Will Smith Jr. during the open practices. I thought Tywan Malone had some good open practices as well. So still a major question mark there in terms of that defensive tackle depth, but knowing that Eddrick Houston will be back on the field soon, should be good to go for game one against Texas, is a huge development.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it kind of seemed that way too. Even like we were at hotel check-in on Monday, and just him walking around, came up, interacted with the fans a little bit on our live stream. Check out new live streaming content coming to 11 Warriors. We're going to start. That's something we're integrating. So watch out for that, people. But Eddrick has seemed pretty upbeat, and I was, it didn't seem like a few days afterward in the aftermath that it was going to be anything that kept him out long term. And to hear he'll be back and ready to go against Texas is a huge boost for the team. I think we all expect big things out of Eddrick this year. 5-star talent, moving inside, has packed on the necessary weight, made the necessary changes to his body to prepare for that 3-tech spot. Wish we could have gotten to see him in action in those open practices, or at least you could have gotten to see him in action in those open practices. Again, I was at a wedding. But yeah, it just, for the starters, key to this defense to have those guys ready to roll against Texas. And now, again, developing that depth. Who's going to step up to be that, again, that number one position I'm watching backup-wise is nose guard. Who's the number 2 nose on this team? But overall, defensive tackle depth, getting those guys some fresh reps. And with all the defensive in-depth, too, I mean, you can also look at Bo Atkins and Caden Curry sliding into that 3-tech on Rushman packages in the
Logan George could be another
Logan
guy
George, exactly. So that cultivation of D-tackle depth, a storyline we continue to watch here throughout preseason camp.
Lots more coverage to come here from the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. I know we have interviews with somebody tomorrow. I don't remember. Do you remember?
Linebackers.
Linebackers tomorrow. So we will be back at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center on Wednesday to talk to James Laurinaitis and the linebackers. Lots more coverage to come on 11warriors.com and 11 Warriors YouTube channel. For now, he's Andy Anders. I'm Dan Hope. This has been Press Coverage.